The original Lights Fantastic came to America from its birthplace in France in 1923. In these early years, a neon sign would cause traffic jams, as people would stop to gaze in fascination. This so-called liquid fire was so captivating that it wasn't long before neon was everywhere. Theater marquees, cafe and nightclub signs became an integral part of the streamlined American landscape. Neon was the light of the American dream. As time progressed, new colors appeared as products of new technology. Pink and turquoise started to cover the new drive-ins and diners of the 50s. With the advent of plastics in the signs in the 60s, the public focus shifted away from neon. The bright neon lamps began to be thought of as old-fashioned and somewhat tacky. Soon, many were replaced by the newer plastic signs. Within the next 10 years, even the skill of neon sign making was becoming a lost art. In the early 70s, a new breed of neon craftspeople began to emerge. These artisans were dedicated to exploring new horizons and expanding the world of neon by finding new applications for an art form that in the past rarely ventured beyond the realm of advertising. These artisans created new styles of art by using the electrifying colors and the quality of light obtainable only with neon. In this video, you will see how neon lamps are created. Your host, Jacob Fishman, will take you through the entire process from patterns to painting with a special emphasis on the traditional neon glass shop techniques. Now, let's join our host in the glass shop.
Welcome to the Neon Shop. My name is Jacob Fishman, and I'd like to show you today how neon signs are made. I'd like to take it from the very beginnings of how we deal with the glass, how we bend the glass, how we fill it up with the rare gases that we use. Let me show you a couple examples of some lamps that we already have made. The first one is a clear glass tubing. It's filled with neon gas, but you can't see anything because neon normally is colorless. If we run some electric current through it, you'll see this bright red light. This is very much the type of light that you see when you have lightning. You have electric discharge going through the air. In this case, we have an electric discharge going through the neon gas. This second lamp is also clear glass. However, we have a different gas in here. And here we've got argon with just a little bit of mercury in it that gives us this nice sky blue coloring. This next lamp is also clear glass. However, we have added a little bit of powder on the inside. It's a fine phosphor powder. It's a phosphor coating. It's on the inside of the lamp. It's the same clear glass. And this phosphor is lit from the blue content of the mercury. We could kind of show you that using a hand black light, which is also a pretty handy tool for identifying scraps and table cutoffs when you don't know what they are. This fourth lamp over here is kind of a free-form sculpture made of different types of color tubing, similar to the tubing that you have in stained glass windows, where the glass itself has color in it. Some of them are clear, some of them have coatings in them. So by using this combination of different gases, different coatings, and different colored glasses, we could achieve a wide spectrum of different colors. One thing, or I should say a couple of things that these lamps all have in common is that they're closed vessels with electrodes on them so we can pass the electric current through, and each one is unique because they've been shaped in the glass shop. So let's go and talk about shaping the glass, bending the tubing, and working in the glass shop. Okay, the thing that all of our neons have in common is that they're all made out of glass tubing. The glass tubing normally comes in 4-foot lengths like this. Some of the European tubing comes in 5-foot lengths. We could just light up this straight line, and you've seen that around clubs and window displays where you have straight borders. That's kind of boring. What we want to do is we want to be able to bend this tube into any kind of shape, maybe into letters, maybe into something artistic. The main torch that I use in bending is the crossfire. This crossfire that I use is a 5-point crossfire, meaning that it's got 5 tips in opposition with the other 5 tips. Some shops will use 6 points, some shops may use 7, may use other configurations. In mine, the tips are held together with this manifold, which is supported by a riser pipe. The riser pipe also has the function of supplying gas mixture to to the tips. There's a mixer down below which mixes my gas and my air to give me the right fuel mixture. The gas I use is natural gas. It comes right out of the pipe. Some parts of the country, they'll use propane. When I talk about the air supply, this is forced air. This is not compressed air. I use a blower rather than a compressor, which gives me a high volume at low pressure. Another appliance I use is my hand torch. This again has two tips, kind of like the Crossfire in opposition. They're smaller tips. The nice thing about the hand torch is I can bring this to my work rather than having to carry the work to the fire. We'll come back to that later. The other major torch that I use in the shop is the ribbon burner. The ribbon burner is particularly nice because it has a bed of flames and I can heat a large area of glass at once. I can control the amount of fire that I have in here by a slide, which is inside blocking off the gas supply. This way I can make large swooping bends or nice round curves, things like that. If I have to get even a larger area, there's other heads that I could put on here. These lift off, and you can put on a larger head. This is a 24-inch head. This is for if you really need something really, really wide. You can open up slides on both ends. I think typically, maybe only 10% of the neon shops use heads this big. There's also a small 6-inch head that I use, which is one of my favorites. It's very good for small script work. You can move your hands around the fire easily. It gives you a nice even fire too. This I think is probably one of my favorite burner heads. I'm going to put the 16 back on. I think this is really the average burner. When you go and buy a ribbon burner, this is the stock head that'll come with it. Just like the Crossfire and the hand torch, this has a gas supply and an air supply. I have valves below. You'll notice as I go from fire to fire that all my gas valves are marked in red. This is for safety. Let me fire these up, show you what these look like in action. I need my air supply turned on, and I need to open my gas valve. The gas valve is open when it's running across with the pipe, and it's a good idea, anybody setting up a shop, whether it's at your home or an industrial space, to get a plumber that's a good, reputable plumber that can take care of all your gas needs. Okay, in lighting the Crossfire, it's a good idea to have some air running first. I can feel that with my hand. And I open up my gas valve, maybe about a quarter to 3/4 of a turn, somewhere in there. Moving back, I light with the match under the tip. I stress moving back because if there was a lot of gas present, or if the air was interrupted, you might get a large billowing fire. So it's a good idea to be safe. That looks pretty good. I got lucky. I opened it to a point that I knew was pretty safe. The Crossfire really has a very large latitude of fire too, depending on the fuel mixture that you give it. Let me go through a few of these just so you can see how important a good fuel mixture is. Let me kill the air first. The air, very important to this fire. It does two things for us. One, it gives the gas enough temperature to get up to the point where we can soften the glass. It gets us up to about 700-800 degrees. It also gives us velocity to keep this fire all focused at one point. Here, this is gas only. We're not going to do much with this. I'll add a little bit of air. You'll start to see the fire now coming together at a point. Still, this is a very soft fire. I would be standing here for days trying to get glass to bend. I add more air. You'll start hearing a little bit of a whistle, a little bit of a roar. You're seeing it all concentrating into one point. It's also getting to be a much hotter fire. Now we're getting up to a temperature of maybe around 800 degrees or so. That looks pretty good. The only way to really evaluate your fire quality is by working a piece of glass in it. So let's do that. Okay, I'd like to do some glass work in the fire now. As I said before, the glass comes in 4-foot sticks. I'd like to cut it up a little bit. It makes it a little easier to work in the fire, a little better for the demonstration. Cutting glass is really one of the skills that you have to kind of master, and it takes a little bit of time. A couple of hints I can give you. One thing is the glass has to be very clean. Take a paper towel or a handkerchief wipe the glass off. Any particular matter, any grease will stop the file from cutting. I use a regular flat file, occasionally running it on the grinding wheel to expose new teeth. I'll cut this piece in half, find the center. I score it. I pull the file across and turn the glass at the same time, holding the file edge at a 45-degree angle. On a long piece like this, I like to hold the end and then I grab the other piece and give a tug and a snap down at the same time. It's the tension that breaks the glass, not the compression. So I'm doing more pulling than I am pushing. Let me cut this up a little smaller. Again, you take the file almost like you're playing violin for all you musicians out there. Sometimes it breaks just from the heat of the file. Anything you can do to open up this score is valid. You can hit it on the back. You can take it, you can hit it underneath. Get some more out here. Some people even use the file kind of as a wedge. It'll push it down on it. So there's several ways that you can make the glass cut. I'm going to stop cutting now because otherwise I'm going to have too small of pieces to use. Now that we've talked about cutting, let's talk about some flame working. Let's work the glass in the fire. Whenever I'm working the glass in the fire, I like to make some marks on it. It helps me see where the glass is in the fire. That way I don't get lost of what I'm doing. Also, for students, it helps students see what I'm doing. I use a soft piece of chalk when I'm teaching because it makes these nice bold white marks that are easy to follow. For my own personal work, I like to use a soft lead pencil. I'll put one of those marks on there too, you'll see what happens. Sometimes I'll even use a felt tip marker because it'll make a nice bold mark. The problem with the felt tips is, of course, if you mark any glass that's warm, it wrecks the felt tip. The good thing about it is the felt tip will tend to disappear right about the working temperature. Let's take this glass into the fire. Whenever I approach the fire, I try to think about my posture. Try to stand straight, keep my hands right out. This is where you can decide when you're setting up a shop just how high you want your fire to be. You don't want to be leaning down over the fire. You don't want to be reaching way up. After a few minutes, the glass starts to soften. This is happening at about 750 degrees. You can see the marks that I put on there. The reason I put 3 is so you can see if there's a twist, which is what you want to avoid doing. You can also see if the glass is moving. Can you see what gravity's doing? It's making the glass fall. I'm going to defy gravity for a little bit here. Let it fall the other way, get back into a straight rod. You'll see that the marks are getting closer together. The wall is also getting thicker. This is called gathering. I always gather my work slightly as I work to keep the wall thickness there. Normally I wouldn't gather this far. I'm going to blow it out a little bit, try to get back to the original wall thickness. A little puff opens the wall thickness. A little pull brings down the diameter. You'll also see the marks come apart. It gets it back toward the original state. It's a very good exercise to do this over and over again. You really learn the feel of the glass in the fire. It's an interesting feeling. When you're holding a solid rod, you're supporting this rod with both hands. As soon as it gets hot and it starts to get fluid, it's like you're holding separate sticks with a soft spot in the middle. If you can do this, if you can gather and blow it back out again and gather and blow it back out again several times, this is going to build up a good skill of being able to handle the glass. Of course, after it's worked 4 or 5 times, you're not going to want it for use. The wall's getting thick. I'll blow it out again. You see it's fat. I pull it a little bit, bring it back to its original diameter, and you'll see the wall thickness is just about uniform. We'll talk a little bit more about gathering as I do some bends. You'll learn the importance of it as we really move along. Okay, let me put this aside and take a couple other pieces that I've worked on. Let's talk about joining some glass. In joining glass, I'm going to put these two rods together. A little bit of heat will make the glass sticky, and it'll stick. That's not enough. I really have to work them together and get that material to fuse. When I do that, the pushing is going to cause some gathering. Again, it's going to make a thick wall. I'll have to puff it out a little bit. I have a cork in the other end so I don't just blow air through. Something to keep in mind when you're blowing is not to have a sharp edge. Here I've intentionally picked a factory edge, which is smooth. If you have a sharp edge, you could rub it against the side of your file. Take the edge off a little bit. When I make seals, this is one time that I don't make marks. As I approach the fire, I cover one end with my finger. This stops hot air from rushing up the tube. The problem with hot air rushing up the tube is it always also carries moisture with it, and the moisture will condense on the cold glass. You can see a little bit of flare. You can see almost a wet look. I lay the glass together. I take my finger off the end. I roll it in the fire, make sure it's well fused. I come out of the fire and I look at it, make sure it's straight. I give it a little puff. I give it a little pull. So we've got the glass back together. I'm going to cut this piece again and seal it a second time. Make sure that you really get the idea of what I'm doing. Cutting hot glass, you'll also discover, is a little different than cutting cold glass. Sometimes the chill of the file, just touching the glass, will cause it to break. Again, you'll see a little bit of red flare as we start getting up to working temperature. You'll see it start to move and soften. You just lay the glass together. You don't force it very hard. Just a slight gather. Come out of the fire. Little puff. A little pull. Now sometimes to straighten this, I may look at it one way and turn it. Another way, sometimes I'll look down the tube to see that it's straight. At this point, you might think it's funny. Why is he cutting the tube and sealing it and cutting it and sealing it? Sealing is very important in the whole process. When we finish a tube, we have to seal on electrodes. We have to seal it onto our bombarder at our pumping station. You may make letters separately and then seal them together. You may make shapes separately and seal them together. So we're always cutting and sealing all through the whole process. Okay, let's do some fundamental bending now. We've got the same 10 millimeter glass. In order for you to follow what I'm doing, let me draw a little bit so we'll know what these bends are. Just draw a baseline. It's our straight rod. What I want to do first is make a 90-degree bend. I'll draw it 90. You can ignore this part. I lay my glass down. This is also where the marking system comes in very important. I want to mark the glass right at this point where they intersect on the inside. I want to mark about a diameter of glass. The final position of this glass will be up something like that. Okay, now that we all know where we're going, let's do it. I'm going to have to blow in this end. I'm going to have to cork this end. I'll go ahead and mark with chalk also, because I think that you'll be able to see that better as I work. You'll also see the felt tip disappear. Sometimes we use this felt tip as an indicator of when it's good to work, when we're reworking some of the some of the bends. There, the felt tip has disappeared. I'm heating up and back past the marks so that I can get everything between the marks hot. You start seeing some motion. You start seeing the sag of gravity. At this point, I lift, accommodating gravity, small puff, and I get back to the table. You can see I've got plenty of time to adjust on the bend. Okay, let me do another 90. I've got another piece of glass. I'll come back on my drawing. I'm going to mark it in the same place. Remember, we mark it on the inside point. We mark about a diameter of glass. We're going to want a cork in the end so that I can blow. And again, I'm going to mark it in chalk also. Having both of these marks is really just for the demonstration. You wouldn't normally do this in practice. Just I think the chalk shows up better in the fire. Notice I'm taking the marks beyond the center of the fire. I'm heating up and back very easily, putting a little bit of pressure on the glass. The glass is starting to soften. I'm holding it very lightly. When it's softened, I hold the marks up. Gravity takes effect. I start to bend. I accommodate gravity. I come out of the fire, a couple of short puffs, and I get back to the table. I really don't want to waste a lot of time getting back to the table because gravity is still taking effect. Got plenty of time again to adjust to get that 90-degree bend. The next bend that we'll do is a double back. A double back is, as the name implies, it doubles back on itself, or it's a U-bend. I'll take another piece of glass here, and I'll draw what I'm going to do. Let me just move my 90 up. Notice that you can use a glass as a drawing tool, as a parallel line maker, just by rolling it. I'll draw my double back below it, about a diameter away. And the double back is going to be a U-bend in the glass. Something like that. The double back we mark a little bit differently. It's actually like two 90s. We mark on the outside of the bend. Since it's like two 90s, we mark twice as much. Again, I'll add some chalk. It'll be easier to follow once I'm in the fire. I don't want to forget my cork. Otherwise, when I blow, I'm not going to have any pressure built up. In the fire again, I keep the marks up. I heat a little bit past the marks. Just starting to soften, but I want to get to a point where it's really fluid. You can see the red flare starting. You see a little bit of gathering? Can you see the marks coming together? Gravity is starting to take effect. I stop moving, I keep my marks up, I start to lift my glass. I come out of the fire, give a little puff. There it is. I go back to the table. Sometimes you'll see I almost drop it on the table. That also helps from, if I hit the table, it might bend it up a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and make another double back right in the same piece of glass, kind of to make a point about the marking system. The marking system will help us make the marks exactly where we want the glass to bend. See, in this first case where I did the 90, I could have moved it up or back and it still would have fallen in the same place. Now we've got this double back here to kind of keep me honest. There, I'll draw the double back there. I take my chalk, I mark it right at the end of the double back. Go a diameter either way. Can you see that? Let me use the Sharpie too. Right at the end, double back either way. Now here, I'm into a new posture. I'm into a posture with both hands on the same side of the fire. This makes it a little bit different, at least in the way we feel it and approach the fire. However, the glass reacts the same. Starts to soften. Then you see the red flare starting. Again, the 3 marks help you not only see how much to heat, but they keep you from twisting. The glass starts to fall. I accommodate, come out of the fire. Little puff, go back to my pattern. Now, if I did everything right, I should end up right on the pattern. Indeed, I do. This is one of the reasons that we have this marking system, is so you can go back and you could reproduce results, so you can have a consistency. Let me do another bend now, a third very fundamental bend that we call a combination bend. It's called a combination bend because it's actually 2 bends work together. You could think of our double back as being a combination bend because it is like 2 90s. However, in what I call the combination bend, or a drop as some people call it, we're going to come up and go another way. So it'll be like the double back, but we're changing directions in the middle. Let me draw one first. It's a new piece of glass. Oh, that's the glass I put seals in, but that doesn't matter. We can use that. This will also be, let's use this seal for a reference point as long as I happen to pick this glass. I'll mark where that seal is. That way you'll see that we're actually getting the glass to fall where we want it to. On the combination bend, I want to come up and over. From the top it'll look like the 90, but actually our final position is off the table. We're in this back dimension, as far back as the double back would have brought us. In this case, I mark on the outside because we're making 2 90s. I mark a diameter either way. Again, I'll put some chalk on there so when I go in the fire, you can follow it a little better. Okay, what am I forgetting? Cork in the end. Also, here's a case where I've noticed I've got a sharp end here. Just so I don't cut my lip, I'm going to file that end a little bit. Okay, a little safety first. Okay, let's heat for the combination bend. It's very much the same heating as the double back. Actually, the bend is very much like the double back in that we're heating 2 diameters of glass, and we're going to start moving like the double back. However, in the middle, we're kind of going to change direction. I'm going to start bending like a 90. I'm going to come up and then toward the camera. Here it goes. Up and toward the camera, but I have to go to my mouth, so it'll be toward me. Back to the table. Here you can see again how the marking system has given us the result we needed. The seal is on the spike mark that I made. Look how warm this still is. I can still adjust. This is the combination. It's come up from the table and 90. I'll do this one again. Let me come back down, into this position here. I'll draw that so we can see where I'm going. And that'll be back down to the table. Mark it on the outside. Mark the diameter either way. Put the chalk on it so we can see it when it's in the fire. This time, since I'm going down, the outside of my bend is really the side with the chalk on it. I'm going to turn it over. This has been different from what I've done. You can see that the final bend is going to be parallel to the piece that I have in my hand. So I'll bend up and toward me when the glass is ready. You start seeing the glass move. You see I'm holding with very little pressure. I lift it, take it toward me, little puff, and to the table. Get some time, I can adjust it a little bit. A combination bend is any combinations of bends. Well, you have 2 90s. If you thought of having two plumbing elbows. You can put them together like this, offset like this. You can have them go any way. It's like a double back, which would be this way, only it's askew a little bit. Sometimes what glass blowers just call a drop is a combination where you're doing this. You're going from the table, jumping up, jumping back down again. Let me do a couple bends. I think it would make more sense if I do a few bends in a row so you can see how a whole run of bends works. I have this 90 I made earlier. Let me use it. I'll put a double back in this. Put a double back right there. Let me make a little mark here so you'll see where it's going to fall. Remember the double back? Diameter each way. I'm going to double back over. The final position of the glass is going to be up here somewhere, going that way. Start to see the red flare. I hold the marks up. Gravity takes effect. Accommodate gravity. Come out of the fire. Small puff. Back to the table. A lot of times you'll see me put my head over it to try to look down on the pattern. Helps me line them up. Put another bend in there. I'll put a combination bend. I want to drop down to the table so the final position is back flat on the table. Mark it with a Sharpie so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to mark it there and about a diameter either way. Get a good chalk mark on there too so you can see it in the fire. Final position will be going straight. I'll be in a straight line again. Here's another time that you have to kind of adjust your posture a little bit. I don't want to reheat this 90 that's on the bottom, so I kind of get in there on an angle to try to avoid disturbing that bend. As it softens, I lift it a little bit. I start to let it fall right into place. Gravity's doing that work. I'm not pushing it. Little puff. Go back to the table. Any straight line will do. Line them up. Sometimes I even roll it. Helps me get into a straight line. Sometimes I double check by sighting down the glass. Any of those moves are valid. You can see a pattern starting to fall here. I'm starting to make what looks like it could be a letter. This could be the center of an E. Could be the middle of an H. This is a very good piece to practice if you want something to practice on, is doing a 90, a double back, and a drop. It gives you a nice, sort of an obstacle course to follow through. If you made this all day long, you would become a pretty proficient glass blower. The other main burner in my shop is the ribbon burner. To start the ribbon burner up, I like to use my hand torch. I do this really as a matter of safety, and it saves a lot of matches too. I take the hand torch, I'm using it as a pilot light in this case, and I put it right on the end of the ribbon. I start a little air, and I start opening the gas. This way I never have too much gas. That's a pretty good fire. The ribbon also, like the crossfire, has a wide range of fire that we can go through. I like to get the air really moving on this burner because that'll give me a lot of good heat. A little more gas, a little more air. Really gets things cooking. Take my glass just like before. Good idea to clean it off. The cleaning's not only for when you're cutting, but for when you're bending too. If there's grease on the glass, you you'll actually burn it into the glass. You'll get some marks. They'll never go away. I come into my fire slowly. I've got my left hand way out there because that's about the center of the rod since I have such a long piece. I heat it, moving up and back, turning the glass, trying to get even heat. You'll see as before I hit a softening point, but I keep heating. I really want to get a lot of heat into this glass and really make sure it's fluid before I start moving it around. You see gravity takes effect before I turn. I use this gravity. There I can make a nice broad U. I can keep going. I can make it a complete circle. A little puff keeps the wall from collapsing. You see how the circle turned into ellipse? That's from gravity. It pulled it down further. Let's heat up a little more glass. See what else we can do. Now that I've got this one circle in the glass, you can see I can't really turn all the way around. So I try to compensate by kind of hanging in there. This is the advantage of that small head that I showed you earlier. If I had the small one on, I could get the circle all the way around. Here my glass is getting soft. You see a little red flare. Gravity's taking effect. I have a lot of glass hops. I can move this around once, twice. This makes anybody almost an instant artist. You have a lot of fun with the ribbon burner, make all kinds of things. Anybody can take glass and just whip it into a free-form sculpture this way. But what I want to show you is really how to use the ribbon burner in conjunction with the marking system so you can plan your bends, so you can have an idea and have it come out the way you want it to. Okay, let's shut this down for a second. I'm going to move the ribbon burner in a little bit, and let's combine all the fires in the shop together to try to form some things. Okay, now that you've kind of had an overview of the whole neon shop, all the burners, most of the tools, I'd like to try to put it all together and make a sign all the way through. I have this pattern here of the word neon, very much like the lamp you saw when we first started. The first thing I have to do with this is I have to transfer it onto the table that we're working. This is just on drawing paper now, and of course if I put the hot glass on it, it's going to burn. The other thing I have to do is I have to reverse this pattern. When you see neon signs, the front of them are always flat. They're on a plane. All the work of connecting the letters happens behind. Even on some signs where there's large marquees, like in theaters, things like that, the neon sections are plugged into boxes, so the electrodes are coming out of the back. If we were to make that into the table, those electrodes would be pointing into the table, and we couldn't have that. So we always work face down. Here's my pattern. The way I'm going to reverse this, the way I'm going to copy it, is with carbon paper. The way that I'm going to reverse it is by using the carbon paper on the back side of my transvestis. So bear with me a minute while I roll this out. This is carbon paper that's made specifically for sign shops. They'll use this later for patterns to copy metals, other things over as well. One important thing is that this doesn't move around once I start tracing it. So what's good is to have a weight, something to hold it down. What I use a lot is my ribbon burner head. It's handy. It's right here. I'll set it down that way. Everything kind of stays together. Now I can use a pencil. I can use a pen. Some people will even make what we call glass pencils, where you take a piece of glass and pull them to a point. That way you don't draw on the actual drawing. I'll just use a pencil for now. Glass rod comes pretty handy for a straight edge. I always trace the baseline. That'll help me line things up later. So I get the lines parallel on the top and the bottom as a starter. The next thing I do is I look at this pattern, and I've got to think ahead for some of the problems that I might run into. I have to think about how to connect these letters together, where I'm going to put electrodes, things like that. So studying the pattern, I look and I follow the letter through and I figure out the top of the N. That's a good place to connect. I'll follow through the E, connect the O, go around the O, connect the end. And at the end of the ends, I'll put an electrode on either side. I think I'd like to start with the O. It's in the middle of the word. Seems like a good place to start. I'm going to try to heat this on the ribbon burner all in one heat. Make one swoop all the way through it. So I have to figure out how much fire am I going to need. Well, I think back to those days when I was in school studying geometry. How far is it around a circle? Well, we learned that it was pi times around, which is about 3. So I'm going to mark off 3 diameters. There's 1, there's 2, there's 3. Sometimes we're not always as lucky to have a nice perfect circle. I might have a shape like an S or an irregular curve that I want to mark. So another way that I can measure is I could use a piece of rubber hose and I could lay that out in the shape of the O. And this saves me a lot of times when I'm doing things. See how close that came out to my marks? Not bad. There's 1. Actually, the 3 mark was maybe about an inch longer. I'll go with the 3 mark. Okay, if you remember lighting up the ribbon burner, I use my hand torch. I use it for a pilot light. I use it for safety. Take a little fire from there over to here. Get some air going. Get some gas going. That looks pretty good. And I think what I'm going to do is shut off the hand torch. Whoa. And just get it out of here for now. Simplify things. Okay, I've got my glass. There's 1 mark at this thumb. There's 1 mark at another. That's almost my whole ribbon burner. If I had an O that was any bigger than that, I'd have to use either the bigger head on the ribbon burner, or I'd have to do it in more heat. Sometimes if you make a large circle, like a 2-foot circle, a 3-foot circle, you're sitting there only, doing 10, 12 inches at a time. And it takes a long, long time to do it. Okay, starting to soften now. Okay, let gravity take effect. Turn it. Get into an O shape, and let's get down to our pattern and make sure that I'm getting into that circle that I want. And that worked out pretty good. I'm keeping this in line. I'm taking my other hand, it's going up a little bit higher, but I'll correct that in the crossfire. Okay, while it's still warm, I'm going to make a quick mark right there. I don't want to hit that too much with the cold chalk because I could get a chill and make it crack. I'm going to get in here while it's still warm, try to straighten it out a little bit. Well, you should have just learned something there. I know I did. I should have trusted the hose instead of my geometry teacher. A little puff. And there we go. Okay, one last thing I want to do to this O is remember I connect all these letters from the back. This is already off the table. This side is not. I'm going to put a little combination bend in here so I can get it up to connect it for when I make that end. I'll just mark it in the middle. I think I'm finished with my ribbon, so I'm going to kill it. noisy. Also saved me a little bit of gas. Okay, back to the crossbar. This word neon only having the one O in it, I'm going to save my ears, make it easier for you to hear my narration. But typically you can see that in the average work that we do, we jump up and back from the ribbon to the crossbar. I'm heating it. I'm going to let gravity do its thing. See, gravity's letting that fall. Little puff. Back to the pattern. Now we have a nice O. Okay. It's still pretty hot, so I'm just going to put it above our pattern here to cool. Okay, let's go to the E next. Just to have a little fun, I brought out some different color glasses, some different coated glasses. This is a yellow coating, and there's a ID tag on it. It tells us the manufacturer and the color name. Sometimes you'll see these stay on signs. Sometimes you'll see people cut them off. I only need about half the stick, so I'm going to cut it in half. As before, I score it, expose it, tap it somewhere. Okay, so far I've only talked about clear glass. Now we've got something else. We've got this coated glass. And what I want to do is I'm concerned about when I put this in my mouth, I don't want to really get any of this powder in my mouth. So I'm going to clean some of this off by wiping it away with a little piece of cork, which should be good enough. Now I'm going to go for the letter E. Well, the O was easy. It was one bend. I made a clean sweep, and there was no problem. The E, I have to study it a little bit and think about, where do I start on this letter? What's going to make this easy for me? If I start with this double back, then when I try to make these bends, there's going to be some conflicting there. If I start down here, then I'm working back toward myself. So I know from experience that I like to start in the middle. I'll mark that just to make a note that we're going to start at this bend. Okay, the 90, if you remember from earlier, we mark at the center. Here I am using my pencil again, my old habit. I use the chalk so when we get in the fire you can follow it a little easier. And I mark about a whole diameter. The final position is going to be right here. I'm going to make this 90. Back over to the crossbar. Again, I'm in that first posture where I'm holding the straight rod. I'm heating, trying to get even heat, going a little beyond my marks. Look what happens to the pencil. You see how it kind of glows when it gets hot? You can see the area between the marks getting red. Keep the marks up. Gravity starting to take effect. I accommodate, come out of the fire. Little puff. Back to the table. I was so busy talking there that I puffed it a little hard. Mark it there for the double back. A lot of times, if I'm not happy with a bend, I get rid of it. And I'm not happy with that one, so I'm going to throw it away. I still have the other half a piece of glass, so I'll use that. Again, I'm going to clean the end that I'm going to blow on. Cork the other end. Same as before, I'm going to mark the center. Final position is going to be right here in line. Now you'll notice I'm starting to take shortcuts as I'm getting excited about working here. Typically when I work, I only make a center mark. I've been making 3 marks all along just to help you to see what I bend. Again, you see the heat. Gravity's coming in there. Starts to bend. A little puff this time, Jake. And down to the table. Much better. Much better. There have been times where, even the best glass blower is going to throw a couple of them away. Okay, now I want to make the double back. I want to come back over so that my glass is in this final position. I'll mark it with the center of the bend right there, even with the tip. Go a diameter either way. Back to the fire. You can see how loosely I'm holding this glass. I'm just supporting it, not putting any pressures on it. It's getting soft. Gravity's taking effect. You start lifting it through gravity, come out of the fire, little puff. Back to my table. Do any adjusting that I need to do. Just want to make sure it's right on top. Not too bad. I foresee a problem coming up. It looks like I'm running, like I might just run out of glass. Well, let's see what happens. This is going to be the combination bend. I really should have marked it, the whole diameter. Notice I'm holding it in there sideways this time. That's really so I don't upset that first 90 that we made. Bring it out. See gravity doing its job. Little puff. I'm going to get it down just to any straight line. Line it up. Remember earlier how I rolled it? All right, I'll get back to my pattern. Oh, that's going to be so close. Let's see, am I going to make it? I got so lucky this time, guys. I don't believe it. Okay, one thing I won't be able to do, though, is get into the fire because that is so short. I'm going to have to put a little handle on that. Well, that's not a problem. I got plenty of clear glass. I can cut off a short piece. If I can get this cork out of here. There we go. This is also good to see because I have to clean that end before I make any kind of seal. The clear glass won't seal onto the powder if there's any dirt here at all. Glass, when heated, expands. When cools, contracts, the powder would get in there and be almost like a wedge. It couldn't close around it. This would be another chance to see a seal. I know a lot of people always ask me, well, how do you change colors in the middle of a lamp? Well, this is how you do it. Gather, make sure it's together. Little puff. Little pull. I gotta let that cool a little bit so it'll stay straight. Here's a little external glass blowing. Okay, let me go check my marks for the 90 now. There's one right there. We got a diameter either way. I'm sorry, a diameter total. Okay, you see gravity taking effect. Lift, come out of the fire, a little puff. A lot of people ask me, how do you know when you've blown enough? Well, it's a feeling that you get. And sometimes when you blow up a balloon, you can kind of feel just before it's about to go. There's a certain threshold. When you hit that, all of a sudden it goes. Same thing happens with glass. You hit that point, and before you know it, you have a big bubble in the middle. So you can't blow too hard. This is going to be a tricky one. I got a combination right on that seal. Oh, no, I don't have a combination. I have a double back. I got to come back over the top. My final position is up like this. See if we can do that. Fortunately, this seal is still hot. I can go back into the fire. If this seal had gotten cold and chilled out, it would explode when I got in the fire. So I want to heat it up slowly, kind of baby it a little bit. This is one of the advantages of making good seals with uniform wall thickness is that you'll be able to make bends on them. If your seal is thin or lumpy, any inconsistency at all, you won't be able to get away with this. Okay. If it wasn't for the color change, I think that seal would have almost disappeared. Okay. Now you notice on these double backs, I hold it off the table about the width of my finger. There are some glass blowers that will use blocks for this. Lay blocks down, that way everything is the same height. I can finish this letter off with one more 90 in the bottom. Heat a full diameter. Now when I take this, I feel like this is going to be kind of awkward for me because I'm going to be trying to blow into this end and bending this up. So what I do is obviously reverse the cork, make it a little more comfortable. Now I can bend this way and be blowing. Typically you always want that outside of the bend to be pointing down. See, I got plenty of time to adjust that. Okay, now a funny thing kind of happened up on top where I was starting to run short of glass. The end of this is shorter than this. Looks kind of funny. So what I'm going to do, so it doesn't look like a mistake, is I'm going to shorten up on the bottom, make it look like a stylized letter. Where's this going to go? This is just a combination coming up. It's going to attach to our O. I'm heating just like I would heat for a double back. Heating a diameter either side of the mark. In a way, it's kind of like a double back. I could start like I'm going to go and then I'd change directions in the middle. Halfway. Little puff. Get back on my table. Make sure everything lines up. Again, I'm using my finger to hold it off the table. Another way I can make sure that they're the same height, I'm gonna flip them over. Should lay flat on its back. The letter E. Quick review of what I did. Started here in the middle. Did the double back second. Did this drop third. This typical maneuver, this 90 double back drop, you use a lot in a lot of different letters. You can do this on an angle and do an open 90, double back and drop, and you can start leading into the letter A. Okay, that's 2 letters done. I got a couple N's left. Those are pretty easy letters. This is a combination bend going up like this. It's very much like a double back, only it's open. And let's pick another color. Here's a glass. It appears white. You look for an ID tag on this. A mystery glass. I guess we'll have to see what this is going to come out when it's pumped. I'm going to clean it like I clean them all. And let's see, which end am I going to do? This one or that one? This one or that one? I think I'll do this one over here. Does it matter? Yes, it matters because the lead-offs are different. The end points are different. And this time I don't want to run short of glass, so I'm going to make sure there's plenty piece of a handle there. Plenty length here. Mark it right in the middle of my bend. Take it a diameter either way. Okay? This is going to end up, the glass is actually going to be on the table like that, and this top part is going to come up and point over there in the back dimension. Okay, beat it all around. Take the marks to me a little bit. Take the marks away a little bit. I think you should notice that these different glasses look a little different in the fire, although they're exactly the same glass, the same clear glass, just with different coatings on them. Back to my pattern. One leg down, one leg up. My O's doing some work for me. Okay, got the same bend on top. Now you see why I left these long handles. I certainly don't want to grab it there. I also can't see these marks because they're down, so I'll put them on the back of the glass as well. Back into the fire. This is that other posture I talked about earlier too. Working both hands on one side of the fire. Okay, it's getting hot. Gravity's starting to take effect. Starting to fall a little bit. We'll make our bend. Little puff. Get back to the table. Line it up to our pattern. That worked out pretty good. What do I do with this end? This end has to come back and attach to the O. What do I do with this end? Well, that end is where the electrode's going to go. The electrode, haven't talked about those. The electrode is probably the most important part of the whole neon sign. Historically speaking, it was the electrode that really made it possible for these signs to work. For many years, this was held almost secretive. It was the single proprietary invention that kept neon signs almost a monopoly for many years in this country. Fortunately, now we can buy them already made. Glassblowers used to have to make them themselves, which was tough. And there are really two varieties of electrodes. There's this one that has the metal shell inside, which is sealed at the end in glass. The other one has a thin tube attached to it that we can lead out, that we can pull gas through, and that's what we hook up to our pump. And we use them typically in pairs. You can use two like this and then have a lead out tube somewhere else, or you can use them like that. So let's take this one and put it on right about here, tucked away in a nice place. You can see that's maybe, 3/4 of an inch past the bend. So I'm going to cut that off, put the electrode on. As before, when I seal on any clear glass, I have to wipe away the powder. Make sure I have a good seal. Sometimes I tap it a little bit to knock out any stray powder. Okay, I'd like to put this electrode on this glass. Well, here's a problem. They're different sizes. Okay, I can deal with that in the fire. Another problem I have is this is so small that when I try to put this in the fire, I'm going to burn my hands. So I have a tool, appropriately called an electrode holder, that I can hold that with. And there are several varieties of electrode holders. Now, I'll put this on. First, let's address this problem of being a different size. If I heat up this electrode on the end, the surface material, it'll shrink up. It'll get smaller just because of its own surface tension. I like to flash them first, wake them up a little bit, make sure there's no stress in there. These electrodes cost about $1 a piece. I hate when they explode and you throw them in the fire. So I like to wake them up nice and slow. Just turning it in there, you should be able to see that it is getting fluid and shrinking up a little bit. Now I'll bring in my letter. Now I'll get them both hot at once. You see I bias my heat a little bit toward the letter because it's actually a little thicker wall. A little puff. Little pull. My electrode is sealed. Okay, now I've got to bend it to finish off that letter. I made the center mark. I want to do this, in this one operation, one right after another here, because if I set the letter down and that electrode seal gets cold, I'll come back in the fire and it's going to break. Okay, let's get back to our pattern. Make sure that bend fell at the right place. As soon as it's hardened up enough that I can get the electrode holder off, I'll get it off, and I can sneak that electrode in there. Okay, now there's nowhere to hold this. That's too hot. These ends are too hot, so I'm just going to leave this open-ended for now while I do the other end. Well, I always hate doing the same thing twice. So I'm going to vary from my pattern a little bit just to also give you some other ideas of things you can do. I haven't done too much with the ribbon burner on this side. So I'm going to make a round top end. I don't think that'll upset anybody too much if I just kind of make it a large lowercase n, just for a little variety. Now that does kind of throw me off here because my E is ready to do that. So I'm going to bend the top of the E down to here. Come around that way, and over here, put my electrode. Okay, let me get another piece of glass. And this one I have an ID on. It says turquoise. So I know that I got something different. This will be a colorful sign when we're finished. Get a smaller piece, make it a little more manageable. Clean it. This one I can feel it's got a little something or other up there. I think I'll blow on the other side. Clean that off a little bit. Okay, here again, I have to decide how much glass to heat. I could either go by experience and say, oh, about that much, or use my hose and say about that much. Okay, let's take that hose marks and put them on the glass. It's there to there. If I do that, is that going to give me enough to get back up? Oh, just enough. Just enough. Okay, let's light up the ribbon again. Use my hand torch. Comes in pretty handy sometimes, doesn't it? Oh, here's the hook. Okay, when I laid this down over here, it looked like actually I would end up a little short, so what I'm going to do is set my fire to the marks. I'll sneak up a little bit. I like to look at it to make sure it's nice and symmetric, a little puff. Back on the table. Then I can do some adjusting. I'm mostly concerned with the sides being parallel. Get rid of that noise. Lay this down. Okay, now I've got to do two things. I've got to get this underneath, so it's like that. And I've got to get this pointing up at my E. Which one should I do first? I don't want to do either one of them. The problem is that when I make this bend, I'm going to take this hot piece by my cheek. I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to let this sit and cool while I go address another problem. This should be cold by now. Yep, that's okay. So I'll bend this. Typically, when I've got a sign going, I'll get several things happening at once. Put this up here, it might cool a little faster. Rather than just standing there waiting for a bend to cool, I'll go work on another part of the sign. This is going to be a combination bend. It's going to come up and away from me when I'm holding the letter this way. Most likely before I bend, I'll turn it back down and it'll come toward me and up. Now it'll go down and toward me. Down and toward me. Keeping my eye on that hand torch there. I don't want it to get me. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's just support it for a minute while it sets up. Okay, how's this doing? That's still a little hot. Let's go take another letter. Let's go back to my E, bend this down to where we're going to connect. Again, I'm going to switch corks, make it a little easier on me. this case, I don't really have to mark it because I can see that it's right over that bend. And sometimes I worry that maybe heating the back of this bend may cause it to break. I might just kind of flash that area a little bit. Here it comes. That's the pattern. Kind of line it up my eye. I don't want to let go of that or it'll fall to the table. How can I make it flat? Turn it over. Now it can't fall anywhere. All right, we'll put that up there to cool. How's this one doing? Still a little hot. Let's go back to something else. How's this one? Still a little hot. Everything's hot. So while that's cooling, let me get back to this electrode. This electrode's going to end up on here. And again, it's kind of short to hold in the fire. Can I use my electrode holder? I can't because of the lead-in tube. So what I'm going to do is I'll create a glass handle. And while I'm doing that, I'll also extend that lead-in tube. Here's another seal. Same seal we've made before, only it's in 5mm glass. Notice instead of a cork, I got my finger over this end. I got a finger over this end too to take care of that problem of condensation we talked about earlier. Make a seal. Little puff, little pull. If you remember at the beginning of this tape, I talked about the argon gas having a little drop of mercury in there. I didn't hear anybody ask, where'd that mercury come from? Well, this is where it comes from. We build a little trap in this 5mm, appropriately called a mercury trap. And during our pumping, we'll put a little tiny drop of mercury in there. There's gravity doing its thing. Blow it out a little bit. Now what I've created is a place where I can set the mercury and it'll lay there, and the gases that I'm going to pull in and out of the tube will be able to go through just fine. And it'll just sit there and wait. Okay, so that's prepared. Now, finally, is this ready? Okay. I want to take this piece under so it'll look more like a script letter with the thing coming behind. So I have to remember now that when I'm in the fire, I want to go that way. So to do that, I'm going to put the mark on that side of the glass. And then I can keep the convention of the marks up. Here I'm in this posture again of both hands on one side of the fire. Now you'll find as you practice on bends that when you make one bend in a piece of glass, it's not too bad. But as you start getting several bends, 2 or 3 bends in the same piece of glass, it starts getting a little tricky. One of the things I like about the exercise where you make an E and you do the 90 double back drop is you end up back in a straight line. Okay, I'll come out. Little puff. Let's get back to the table. You can see I can sneak that under there a little bit, make it a little straighter. Check that I'm all the way at the top. Put a mark there. Put a mark down here. This double back is going to take us up to the E. I'd call that a double back, even though it is sort of a combination bend, since it's not really going in the same plane. That's going to connect to the top of the E. Make it flat. Okay, let me let that cool. Let me go back to the end here. Is this cool? That's cool. Is this cool? Yeah, it's cool with me. Okay, now I want to connect these two letters. Well, obviously I'm going to have to cut them. I'll line them up the best I can on the table. Make a mark. Some people prefer to mark the table and cut both to the same mark. This alleviates any problem with them not lining up exactly. This is where cutting starts getting a little tricky, because we're near the bend, and since that's been flamed work, it may have set up some stress patterns that may affect our cutting. Not on that one. Yeah, that one's worked out pretty good too. Again, we wipe away this powder. Sometimes I even wipe it with my finger a little bit. Tap any extra away. Might check it to see how they fit. Looks pretty good. Put them together. This is just like sealing the other glass that we had. Notice the nice thing about having this O in a line is it's almost like I'm holding the same piece of glass. Or I should say like it's in a line. I'm not really feeling the force being put through the O. Okay, that looks pretty good. Wiggle it a little bit. Little puff. Little pull. Let's get to our pattern. Okay, I like that. Okay, we'll let that cool a little bit. We've got our end back here. Yeah, that's manageable. Got to get my electrode on there. Decide which way it's going to point. I can't go back here. I'll be 3 high. It's going to be a little high back over here too. Well, I don't have much choice. Let's cut this a little shorter. Wipe the extra powder out of there. It's interesting, some of the glasses, the powders act a little different. Most of the colors you have to just wipe them away. The powder green, you can get away with not wiping at all. The color called purple seems that no matter how much you wipe, it's never enough. Same problem, I've got the electrode slightly bigger. One of the most commonly asked questions is, why do I have bigger electrodes in the glass? Well, there's a couple answers for that. One is that glass is available in more sizes than electrodes. The other one is the bigger the electrode, the more current it can handle. Our average neon transformers are 30 milliamps. These electrodes in the 12 millimeter shell are rated for 30 milliamps. The 10 millimeter shells are only rated for 20, so they burn up. Typically we go the same size, or we may go a size bigger on electrodes. You could go smaller if you had specialty work, but it's usually not done unless it's really a special application. Okay, let's get back to our pattern again. Here you can see I've ended up with my electrode straight up. That would be pretty good if I was going into a box, like earlier I said a marquee or something. I'm going to bend it down over the top, really just to get it out of the way. This is going to be tricky because I'm going to have to put a 90 right on the electrode seal. This may have been one of the trickiest things I've done all day. Again, I've kind of adopted a special posture here so I can work around the top of the end. I don't want to upset the top of the letter. Yeah, it came out pretty good. Okay, and I've got a couple more letters to seal together. You can see I'm going to have trouble here because these two pieces of glass are running into each other. So I'm just going to take this 5mm lead-out tube and bend it out of the way. I'm staying away from the very cap of the electrode because that'll crack from too much heat. I want to stay away from that seal too. So I can get that out of the way. Again, I got to support it, otherwise I'm going to lose it. Okay, this is cool. Okay, let's put the N and the E together. See, now you can see, now that I've got a lot of bent pieces, it's really kind of getting a little more difficult to manipulate them in the fire. This might even be a good time to introduce the hand torch. I'll tough it out, see what happens. Whoa. There we go. Got away unscathed. Line it up. Got to hold them till they cool. A little more of that external glass blowing. This would have been a good application for the hand torch because I could have had it all just laying out on the table. Worked on it that way. The only problem I would have had is how do I get out here to blow? Well, I'm going to show you how I would do that. As soon as I figure this part of the problem out. I've got to put the NE and the ON together. And that's going to be pretty easy to do in the crossfire once they're cut because I now have something I can hold, and that's all in the clear when I work in the fire. Let me cut the E. I'll mark it, make a mark on the table. Mark the O. Again, I'm trying to hold my head in the same place so that I don't shift around too much. This is all cool. You can see I approach everything very softly. It seems that if there's a hot spot, you're going to grab it there. There's an interesting way that I cut. I grab it and I pull out with my hand. It adds that tension so that when I just tap it, it snaps off clean. Okay, I take the ends of the hose, get it into the end of the tube. Now I don't have to climb down there to blow. Take my hand torch and go to work. This is a little bit like driving around in first gear because it goes a lot slower. The hand torch is certainly less of a fire than the crossfire. And again, normally I would do this in the crossfire. I just wanted to demonstrate a use of the hand torch other than lighting the ribbon burner. Go side to side, trying to get even heat. Get it on the bottom, get it on the top. Let's see what happens if I puff it out a little bit. That's one way I know that it's actually sealed, is that when I blow, I see it expand. If nothing happened, or if I heard a hissing sound, I would know that I wasn't there. You can make a nice clean seal that way. And there we go. We've got all our work together. Woo! Take a last look that it's actually squared up, fitting the pattern. And there we have a completed section. We've created this vessel. It's closed. It's got an electrode at both ends. We have a lead-off tube. The only thing left is the final process of pumping. So we have to take this over to our pumping station, evacuate it, pull all the air out of it, fill it up with gas. This is a pretty simple process, but it goes into quite a few steps. So let me take it over there and I'll explain it to you. All right, this is the pumping station. This is where we're going to transform the glasswork that we did into a neon lamp. There's a few things that we have to do in this pumping process. The most important is we have to cleanse the tube. We have to get all the impurities out of the inside. We have to remove impurities that are in the electrodes when they were made. We do this by heating it up internally as we draw a vacuum. The vacuum is drawn through the manifold down to a vacuum pump which is under the table. The vacuum pump is hooked up through this main stopcock, which will control the pressure of the whole thing during the process. After this tube is cooled off, we'll backfill with the appropriate gas into the tube. Now that you've got an idea what I'm going to do, let's do it. You remember when we made the tube, I made this little mercury trap, and I talked about the little bit of mercury that gives us some color. I carefully dispense my mercury, making sure I don't spill any. And I have to seal this onto the manifold. There's two ways we could do this. Some shops will use a vacuum hose. I prefer making a glass seal. I think it makes for a better seal. But also we have our hand torch handy and it works well for that. Now, one thing that I want to say about this whole process is it's almost never the same twice. Different pumps pull at different speeds, different bombarders have different power, different sections are longer, shorter. There's always so many variables that you can't really have one solution. So if you see me heat the tube for 20 seconds, that doesn't mean you have to heat the tube for 20 seconds. We'll look for certain landmarks in the process that tell us when to do things. Remember, it's important. Every tube is different. Okay, with the tube now attached to the manifold, I'll attach a high voltage transformer. This transformer is about 20,000 volts and has a high current rating, about 10 times the normal transformer that you would use. To protect the tube from having voltage arc across the tube, I'll use a little bit of mica. Mica is a very good high voltage insulator. They may have told you back in grade school that voltage always takes the easiest path to ground. Well, when you deal with very high voltages, it'll take 4 or 5 of the easiest paths to ground. So this is just really to protect the tube. I also use a glass tabletop made out of glass rods. This is to protect the arcing from going to the table. With this type of voltage, if the tube were to break, I can throw an arc about a foot long. So this is some pretty serious voltage. All right, I start by pulling a vacuum to drop the pressure a little bit. You'll hear the vacuum pump fall in pitch. This is a good sign. I'll strike, let the tube warm up a little bit. After the pressure drops a little bit, the tube gets a little warm, I'll close the main stopcock. I want to do this because I want to leave some air in the tube in order to have a medium to heat it with. I have a crayon that I mark the tube with, and this is a special crayon that has a pigment in it that changes color at the right temperature. This one is calibrated 540 degrees Fahrenheit. I'll go ahead and heat the tube. You'll notice while I'm heating that the color is changing. Different things are coming out of the glass wall. Water vapor, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, all things that were present when this glass was made. The same thing will happen to the electrodes as they heat up. Electrodes, when they're formed, all the things that were in the environment when they were formed are trapped in the metal. We're going to get them red hot, so they'll degas, so all this gas will come out of there. As the color's changing, I'm watching the crayon. I'm seeing a little bit of smoke on it. I'm also watching my milliamp meter. That'll tell me a little bit about what's happening. Okay, the crayon is starting to smoke very nicely. Let me stop for a second. Indeed, the color's changed. The electrodes are starting to glow. I'll open up the stopcock. While everything's hot enough, I want to pull it out. Okay, we're getting to the end there. Vacuum is falling. You can see a little flicker in the tube. And that should do it. The electrodes now are cherry red. They've really degassed completely. Okay, now this tube will have to cool down a little bit, and the vacuum pump will keep pulling and pulling and pulling until the pressure in this tube falls to about 1 micron. While it's cooling, let me talk about the backfilling that's going to take place. When the tube is cool, I will open up the stopcock to the argon and backfill with argon. As I do that, I will watch the pressure rise in the manifold with this manometer. A lot of people ask me, well, where does this gas come from? Do you have big tanks in the basement? I get my gas in glass bottles, glass flasks that are 1 liter. This is 1 liter at air pressure, atmospheric pressure. And you might think, well, gee, that really must go fast. Actually, I could fill about 50, 60 tubes off of one of these. Your first impression when you look at this is, gee, I've been ripped off. There's nothing in here. Of course, the gas is colorless and it weighs next to nothing. So you don't know unless you light it up. I can inspect a flask if I think that one is leaked. I can inspect it by using a spark coil. Let me grab this over here. Can you see the red glow? That's the characteristic color of neon. You're seeing that inside the flask. You'll also see that in my manifold where the neon is in there. The argon's a little harder to see because it's a very dark blue. This tool is also used for finding leaks. If I were to probe across my work, if there was a small, tiny leak, the spark coming off here would go right to it and light it up and help me find that spot. Okay, back talking about the gas pressure. The gas pressure I read off of a chart. I keep one handy on the wall here so I can always refer to it by my manifold. If you look at this chart, across the top, you've got the different sizes of tubing. On the bottom, you've got a recommended filling pressure. There are some times that you will change pressure slightly for special cases. If a tube is very, very short, we might add a little. In this case, I've got 10 millimeter tubing. The bottom of the chart tells me I want 13 millimeter pressure. This chart also tells me, with all these other numbers, how much footage I can expect to get off on a particular transformer. This tube, I'm just guessing now, is maybe 8 feet of tubing, 10 millimeter tubing. 8 feet is somewhere in this range, 7 to 9. I'll go with the 9. I should expect to take about 5,000 volts to light that tube. Let's see how the cooling process is going here. That's not bad. The tube should be just cool enough so you can hold on to it comfortably. That's maybe somewhere around 100 degrees. I can test the vacuum at this point with just a short flash nothing lights, that's a good indication that everything is pulled out of there. If this tube was leaking, you would see a pinkish, a fleshy pink type of glow to it, which would be an indication that air was present. Okay, satisfied that I've got a good vacuum, I'll close the vacuum pump. I'll engage my gauge, which is just a closed loop manometer. And I'll slowly let argon drift back in. Watch the manifold pressure as I do this. It's going up slowly. My target is 13. There, 13 millimeters pressure. How does my tube look? Pretty good. Okay, I'll open my gauge, because if anything were to crack now, this gauge would want to go all the way up to the top, and I don't want that to happen. I don't want to waste any time at this point. I want to seal off this tube before anything happens. Get the mic out of here, get my hand torch. Now I heat the tube, this 5 mil tube, about, a quarter of an inch. And as soon as I see it starting to collapse, I'll stop heating and I'll pull away. I want that to close up on itself. Then I'll go back and burn this thread off. I've left the mercury in the trap. I'm going to age this tube for a while, put it onto a neon transformer, and when I'm satisfied that the tube is working properly, then we'll add the mercury. Okay, here's our tube that we've just bombarded. It's been burning for a while, and I'd like you to see the nice color that it has now. This deep purple color that you see in here is the characteristic color of argon. This is what we want to see before we dump the mercury in. Normally I let these cool before I dump the mercury, but it's kind of fun to watch it go in. So I'll dump it now while the power is on. You can see as soon as the mercury goes in, the brightness goes way up. Let's see if I can convince it to go down. There we go, into the clear section. Up into the yellow. There it is, the top of the yellow. Comes down. So you can see that it's really this mercury that gives it its brightness. Now as I'm coming toward the O, watch the purple color go away and that sky blue color take over. Again, normally we don't do this with the tube lit. I'm going to turn it off now, and I'm going to remove the mercury trap. I just heat it lightly until I see it start collapsing. As soon as it starts collapsing, I pull. I want that to come to a point on the inside, and then burn off the thread. Now with a small paintbrush, what I normally do is I go for the detail areas first. See, it's that front that'll make the O show that it's an O. I come halfway up the double backs, halfway up the drops, using the paintbrush to really round it off. When I paint the electrodes, I only paint about halfway up the metal shell. Sometimes it'll take a little touch-up painting, or if you mess up, you can let it dry and you can cut it off later with a razor blade. You can scrape away. We'll let it dry there. All right, while it's drying, let me talk a little bit about some of the neon power supplies. Neon power supplies are really very specialized transformers, and they're made specifically for the neon industry. They're made to have a very high voltage. When the tube fires, the voltage actually drops lower. When we think of transformers, most people think of like a toy train transformer, something like that. With a toy transformer, if you take the output and you short it together, you burn up the transformer. With a neon transformer, they're actually very happy to be shorted together. They pump current in a loop, and they're called a constant current transformer. This is what they look like on the inside. This is, it's got two coils wrapped on a core. This type is known as a core and coil transformer. These come in voltages from about 2,000 volts all the way up to 7,500 volts. A lot of times you'll see this encased in another box, sometimes with a line cord on it, sometimes with terminals on it, and they get bigger voltages. I have a couple others over here. This is one that's really made for a hanging style. It's the same type of core and coil on the inside, but it's got a nice metal box which protects you. It has a line cord, so you can plug it in without having to play around with too many wires. It's got the high voltage wires that go to your neon sign. This is really the typical type that you see most often. The problem with them is they're heavy, they consume a lot of power, they get very hot. Fortunately, there have been some innovations in transformers lately where there are solid state transformers. These are electronic inside, and they're high frequency oscillators instead of high voltage. They're pretty good size voltage. The advantage of these is that they're lightweight, they consume less power, and we're starting to see more and more of these on the market. Okay, let's talk about making a frame for our neon. Now, there's a lot of ways you can mount neon. The most traditional is the glass frame. This is what you see typically in store signs when they're hanging in windows. This is what you see back here on our wall. All of these signs have glass frames around them. It's clear glass, so the framing tends to disappear. I'll make a quick frame. It's basically just a perimeter of the neon sign, and you'll see how it's done. Out of all the steps in the making of the neon sign, the drawing, the tracing, the bending, pumping, the mounting, the glass bending is really the true art of it. It's really when you master the skill of glass blowing that you've mastered the skill of neon. I hope that when you try this, you don't get frustrated. It's not easy as it looks. It takes time. It takes a lot of practice. When I started bending, I used to work with glass almost about 10 hours a week. And it took months before I was ready to work on an apprenticeship level. Really got to the point where I had more fascination in the glass than I did with the light itself. Made me research other areas of glass as well. Okay, well, there's half the frame. Let's take this bend in to the top. Yeah, you can see how soft it is. It's moving around on me. And then I'll have to cut the last corner in with another piece of glass. When you see me blowing, it's kind of hard for me to explain what I've been doing because I've got the glass in my mouth. But typically, I give the glass short, hard puffs. I go. This is good because what it does for you is the glass that's the hottest will move the furthest and thin out. Then on the next puff, the area that remained thick is now hotter, and it'll move. So with each successive puff, it tends to round out a little bit. So don't get on the glass and just blow real hard. It's short, distinct puffs. This little. I didn't say that before when I was blowing because I had my mouth full at the time. All right, I'll make the remaining piece out of this piece of glass here. All I need is the 90 for the top corner. You're working with something that you really can't grab. You can never grab that hot glass in the middle. You can only persuade it by the outside forces. Make some cut marks there. I'll make a cut mark there. We'll put this together. Put the long part first because it's cooler. Okay. Now we have to put this together. Little test fit. The seal is just like before. Heat just the ends. You'll start to see the yellow flare. You get that wet look, you come together. Work it together a little bit so you're sure that it's fused. A little tiny puff. Little pull. Let's get it down to the table. Before it hardens up, I pull out that cork and close it. Let's make sure the bottom line is straight. Okay. Now we're almost there. I have this one last seal to make. This is usually when I have a class, hands start flying up here. How do you make this last seal? There's no way to blow into the tube. Is it going to collapse? Well, we have a little trick that we do. I know somebody will probably think this is funny, but I blow in it first. Now that actually did something. I didn't do that just for comedic value. What I did is I added moisture into there from my breath. Using the hand torch over the edge of the table, I'm going to kind of flash it a little bit. I don't want it to crack on me when I've gone this far. I'll heat it nice and easy. Even heat, top, bottom, side to side. And then I'll come together and stretch it apart. Now at this point, I need to puff that seal. What I can do is roll the hand torch up and down the glass, heating that moisture. Now you'll see the seal puffs itself out. It's kind of like a steam engine in a glass. There I've got a complete frame. I'll let that cool over the side of the table. I don't want to heat shock it. All right, we've done all the parts separately. We've made a neon, we've made a frame. Let's put it all together and make a finished unit. Here's our neon that we made earlier. I'll lay it on the pattern for you. Here's the frame we made. How are we going to attach this? I tie this on with wires. What I do to keep the frame from sliding away, as it just did, is I'll put a little friction tape on it. First, I'll take my Sharpie. I'll mark spots where I want to tie. Get enough points around it so that I can really get it snug. Then I can take a little bit of friction tape and wrap it in each point where I marked. All right, here we go. I take this wire. This is what sign shops call tie wire. It's a tinned copper. Wrap it around the neon, wrap it around the frame. I don't want to make it too tight because I don't want to break anything. So I'll just take all the points where it hits and I'll tie it first just so it's snug. The places where it doesn't touch, we cut some cork and we lay cork wedges in there. That not only fills up the space, but it adds a little bit of cushion too. Okay, what we're finished with is a typical, traditional neon sign on glass frame. Okay, let me wire this up. Here's our transformer. Remember from the chart when we were pumping, it suggested a 5,000 volt. That's what this is. We've got the primary, which is where we plug it in. We've got the secondary wires. Notice the thickness of this. We use a special wire when wiring neon that is called a GTO wire for gas tube, an oil burner. You might want to consult your local codes, talk to an electrician to find out more about things like that. I also use these. These are rubber insulators to cover all my connections. don't want to have bare wire out. This way it's covered, you can touch it, perfectly safe. I have another type of insulator that's a feed-through. You put my wire through it, and that helps if I've got electrodes pointing in different directions. Again, get these connections nice and tight. You don't want them to come loose. Well, there we have a finished neon piece, tied, on a frame, wired, ready to go. Well, I hope this introduction to neon has been helpful to you, answered all the questions that you had, and I hope it stimulated you to go on and learn more about neon. So until then, this is Jacob Fishman from Light Writer Studio, and remember, say it in neon.